Welcome to episode 2 of Hops and Ledgers, brought to you by Whitfleet CPAs and Consultants in conjunction with Beer Guys Radio. Hops and Ledgers will feature quarterly episodes on a variety of topics to help launch and grow your brewing business. In episode 1, we discussed some options for financial relief for brewers amid the coronavirus pandemic. Now, as breweries across the country begin to reopen, we'll share some insight and advice from brewers on how to safely make the transition. I'm Tim Dennis with Beer Guys Radio, and I'm joined today by Pat Tooley of Whitfleet to host and guide our discussion. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thanks, Tim. Whitfleet is proud to host this series of Hops and Ledgers, the business of beer. Our accounting firm delivers results that transform through industry experts that form lasting relationships with our clients. We work with over 100 craft breweries across the country. I reside in Atlanta and head up our craft beer practice in the Southeast. And joining me today from our Denver, Colorado practice is Justin Wenzelman, my West Coast counterpart. Our guests today are both clients of our respective geographies. We have Eric Hashberger, Director of Retail Operations for Weldwerks in Greeley, Colorado, and Chris Herron, CEO of Creature Comforts here in Athens, Georgia. As Tim mentioned, we thought Chris and Eric would provide great local and national context for breweries adapting to the pandemic and its aftermath. Both breweries have been on Beer Guys Radio previously. This should be a great roundtable discussion. I invite everyone to chime in and share thoughts as we make our way through this topic. Thank you, Chris and Eric, for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, gentlemen, Justin, I'll start with you here. I guess one question, we've all seen this. I think when it started, none of us expected we'd be 3 months in and still kind of looking it in the face here. But as things are going and we do start to open up, what are some things that haven't changed at your breweries over the last few months with this, and what are the big changes?
Yeah, can chime in with that. Some of the things that haven't changed. When this first started, we all, I think, in our company were questioning the brewing side and kind of our plans, and we tend to put out a lot of different either single batches or a series of beers, and it was a question of, do we keep doing that, or are we going to be shifting to maybe more shelf stable beers or paring down the number of options we had? And after some discussion, we really decided that especially in a time of a lot of uncertainty and sometimes probably felt like crisis for some folks, of just being able to still be a place that they know what they're going to get, a company, a business, some beer that they're used to and can help in those times when it is some uncertainty going on. And so we didn't really change that model. We still, we're planning and putting out all different kind of beers and styles, and kind of sticking to who we are, and kept going with that. And changes mainly were more on the retail side of having to shift to all to-go beers. So there's, the packaging shifts to all cans. And then what that also did, as we also distribute our beer as well. So going out to different accounts and, striking new relationships to now that we had more cans to put out there. So those were some of the bigger changes that came across from this.
Eric, do you distribute outside of Colorado, or does Weldwerks stay fairly local there?
We stay fairly local in Colorado. We every once in a while will send to some out-of-state markets, but not consistently. And we've also worked with some other kind of online kind of retailers to ship out beer who can ship it to anyone in the country and things like that. But for our consistent model, it's in-state.
So that was something we've noticed here with distribution, is many of the breweries that come here, but we're very limited. We've seen a lot more of them as we've gone through the coronavirus pandemic here. And I imagine it's just, they want to sell that beer. So since the, tap rooms, breweries, and restaurants are closed, we're just seeing more coming in from distribution from out of state as well.
Yeah. And for us, I think we were fortunate in just building those relationships with different distributors over time, as we would go to different festivals throughout the country, and just able to lean on those relationships when we did find that we maybe had some beer volume that we wanted to send out of state, that we had some extras every thing was transitioning.
Now, Chris, of course, I'm here in Georgia, so I've kind of seen how it's gone along there. How have things? The same question, I guess, there for Creature Comforts. What are the major changes for you, and what has not changed?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of similarity between what Eric said and what we're doing. We haven't had any real changes to our portfolio strategy in terms of which beers we would make, when we'd make them. We plan a lot of that out pretty far in advance, and we've been able to stick to that. Thankfully, we naturally, like many folks, right, when all of our on-premise partners who got hit the hardest by this went out. We have some sales folks that call on the on-premise, so we moved those bodies to work in the off-premise, which was seeing an increase for us here in Georgia. And so we shifted that focus, and then those teams, shifted their hours quite drastically as well to hit accounts starting at 5:30 or 6 in the morning and be out of there by noon. So just kind of a shift in sort of some structural process of how we go to market. We didn't increase our distribution footprint at all. We've stayed just in Georgia, and fortunately have been able to keep the tanks pretty full doing that. And then like many others, our tap room changed probably the most drastically. Obviously, that got shut down. We moved to drive through. I always love like this touchless, contactless. I don't know that I'd ever seen anyone use that term before. But now everything is touchless and contactless. So we did a touchless drive-through like most, and the laws in Georgia were tough. We weren't able to we didn't really get any support, quite frankly, from the legislative body. So we got no anything. So we weren't able to send any beer out of state or even to deliver beer or anything like that. So the tap room got hit really hard for sure, without still requiring people to come on site, but they couldn't actually sit down or be served, which obviously was for good reason, but it would have been nice to get some concessions.
Right. And that's something we did have some concessions, like for restaurants who normally could not do to-go sales of alcohol. They did pass, laws that allowed them to do some to-go. So at least restaurants got some relief in that area, where breweries, unfortunately, did not get that kind of accommodation.
And they needed that, so I mean, it's not they shouldn't have, because we didn't, right? I mean, they should have, they deserved it, and they definitely got hit harder. And we're a little bit more fortunate and protected than a lot of our craft beer partners and other fellow breweries here in Georgia, just because we do have a large distribution business, and so that allowed us to be a little more insulated than some of them who were really on site only. But for those folks, it really would have been helpful if they could have done some distribution.
Right.
Hey, Chris, just quick question or point of reference. So for Creature Comforts, pre-pandemic, what percentage of your beer sales, were distribution versus direct to customers? And then the direct to customers, what was the breakdown there between tap room, draft pours versus to-go beer?
Yeah, so I mean, from a revenue standpoint, 50% of our revenue used to come through the off-premise. 35% of our revenue came through the on-premise draft sales to retailers, and 15% was through our tap room. So, overnight we lost 50% of that. And so, I mean, immediately the shift was we were 100% off premise.
Sure.
And then we've had a little bit of recovery in some of the tasting room from a revenue standpoint, but the move to all package versus draft is a pretty big pretty big driver of profit difference. So that we've still, even with the tap room opening, and we made the decision to keep all of our tasting room employees fully employed, and we can talk through that later if you want on how we figured that out. But as a result, that's been a business that's been losing money for us now for 3 months, but it's is what it is.
Sure. Eric, what about Weldwerks? Kind of breakdown distribution versus taproom sales.
Yeah, we're about probably that either 60% distribution, maybe even 65, then 30, or sorry, 40, 35 to 40 tap room before all of this COVID and the shutdowns and things happened. And in our tap room itself, it was about 70% to go cans, and then about 30% in drafts. So when we hit, we we found that we didn't take too much of a hit being able to do the to go sales through the tap room. I mean, we did lose more on our margins with having to cans being a little bit more costs involved with those, but being able to kind of pivot quickly and seeing that most of our can sales were already or most of our revenue in the tap room coming through just to go beer was easy to make that pivot for us, I think, and not have to take a big hit in our revenue through the tap room. Um, and then on the sales side, they're pretty similar, of more heavy. I don't know the exact kind of that breakdown there through our distribution, but more heavy on the off-premise accounts, working with the liquor stores, and again seeing as restaurants shut down, losing. At first, we lost some kind of draft options, but Colorado did work pretty quickly to allow the restaurants and that were offering to go food to then also offer to go liquor sales as well, so they could work through some of the inventory that they had, and we saw definitely a drop off of keg sales going to restaurants, but we had some pick them up still here and there that were able to move that through the help of being able to sell it to go as well.
Hey Eric, this is Justin. I just have a quick question for you, and then for Chris too. With the pivot to obviously all packaged sales going out the door, did you have to change any with your staffing model? Did you have to change to maybe an additional shift of packaging, extra hours doing packaging? Because obviously there's quite a bit of beer that would go out of the tap room until they were shut down. But was there any change to your labor model as well with the coronavirus?
I know the packaging shifts. Yeah, they were a little bit longer and more days. So before this, I roughly about maybe average 3 times a week is when they would do canning runs. And we were seeing during this adding more canning, about 4 to sometimes even 5 days a week of packaging. The shifts, just kind of what that meant is they needed more hands. So I think the great news was we were able to take some of our taproom staff that were very eager to kind of have some different positions, and now different positions opened up for them, and so they were able to make those moves. So we were able to move more staffing to the packaging side because of having to spend more time canning beer. That meant all the other cellar work being done. They that team needed more help and more hands so that the other duties could be done. Of course, not having to do as much kegs, which I know as we started moving out of as draft is opening back more up with accounts and whatnot, the packaging crew has been talking about how happy they are that, like, oh, we finally see kegs on the schedule, and they're very excited because I think having to can lots of batches of beers. I think the big one was a 90 barrel batch, was the first time that was fully canned, and setting a record for like the number of cases that they can in a day. Was definitely, I think, at times kind of just wearing down of how much labor that caused. But we were able to make those shifts nicely and not have to lay anyone off because of that.
Chris, that kind of ties in. You'd mentioned just a little bit ago, since Eric was kind of talking about his workforce, that you were able to keep everyone employed in the tap room, throughout this coronavirus pandemic. How were you able to accomplish that?
Well, for us, it was when all of this hit, and I've said this on a couple of things. Like, I think this is the type of time, right, when businesses have this wonderful opportunity to find out who they are. You create values and purpose statements and mission statements, and then it's real easy when things are going good, and it gets you find out if you mean it when things are going bad. And one of our values is people over products. And so from the very beginning for us, we kind of just said, okay, based on that value, the people is this sort of last ditch effort. And I don't think that we're unique in that way. And we just said, look, we kind of took a look at money. We had applied for the PPP loans and said, what we did was we took all of our tasting room staff. We looked back over the last 6 months, said, what were the average tips in the tasting room and what were the average hours an employee worked. And we just committed to them that through the end of June, now it's through the end of June, we would just cover that. The company would cover their base pay plus whatever tips they would have made and the number of hours that they regularly would have worked, regardless of whether we could provide them those hours. So they sort of moved to collecting a regular paycheck every couple of weeks. And then what we sort of said is, look, now that we've made this commitment, we need everybody's help to figure out how in the world we're going to get some money.
Right.
And it was really through that they went quickly to work on figuring out a drive-through model that, within 2 days we were able to turn around and get up and going. And I think, taking away some of that fear early on, they helped come up with the ideas of the hand sanitizer that we would be able to sell that. And so, it was a pretty significant incremental cost, but I think we were able to keep everybody in good spirits through it. And kind of similar to what Eric was saying, as we started producing hand sanitizer and packaging that, and just other new tasks that arrived, there was sometimes some additional work as well that became available. And so that was, for us, it was more of a sort of value driven kind of decision. I fully recognize that we were also fortunate to be in a position where we were able to do that. By no means do I think all businesses should have done that. I recognize each business is completely unique, and we're really grateful that we were in a position to be able to do it. And I think, because we were in that position, it was the right thing for us to do, was just to sort of eat that cost.
I see. Yes. And that's, we're starting here in Georgia. I think I don't know if ahead is exactly the right term to use in this case, but, we've been on the front end of reopenings, and we're somewhat lax in the limitations as we went through all of this. So as we do begin to reopen here, and we have seen some breweries and tap rooms that have started reopening, what's that going to look like, Chris? What does kind of the near-term future look like for Georgia's breweries and tap rooms?
I can speak to ours, and I am, sit on the board of the guild, so I have some pretty good insight, I think, to a number of what other folks are doing. I think broadly speaking, what we look like is similar to a lot of others. I think, to use, your point, right, whether we're ahead or not, the state was opened up, but that didn't mean the businesses opened up. A lot of us have, been really cautious. And we just started opening our tap room outdoors only about a week and a half ago. We started out, and the model's totally different. It's a table service model. And from what I've seen and heard from a lot of breweries, that's some of the big changes, is a lot more table service than bar setting, where people had to stand in a line and interact face to face with bartenders consistently. Table service has allowed a lot of us to create more space between the guests and ourselves, also create more space between the guests, and then utilizing outdoor spaces, which thankfully, a lot of our breweries have pretty good outdoor spaces. And so, starting there has been kind of, I think, a key for a lot of folks. A little different hours. And then a lot of people are still trying to figure out, like, we're still figuring out, how do we also do the drive-through? How do we not take away our drive-through, which comes through our parking lot, while also doing service out there in the parking lot. And so we've adjusted that a little bit just on the different hours that the two are open. But from a high level, I think it's a lot of outdoor openings, a lot of new sanitation practices and masks, particularly for servers. And then, just trying to keep social distancing between customers, certainly at least groups of customers.
And that was something that I've seen mentioned here, actually, Chris, was that you can't really control totally what people do. And, there's certain people that are probably justifiably extremely nervous about, things going back to normal too fast. So, what are you able to do there with social distancing, as far as, is it just, like you mentioned, kind of limiting access to the tap room? Because if people decide to kind of get together and have a beer at the tap room, how do you address that?
Yeah, so we do allow groups to come together, so if there's a group of for the largest group we can handle is 8, because the biggest table that we can sit them all at. So there's no moving of tables. Tables are they're all separated by at least 8 feet, but on all sides. So that gives us even a little bit of space for us to have a server be able to walk around safely. And then there's no getting up and leaving. There is no going to the bar for a beer. It's all server. The only time that, really to leave the table is for going to the restroom, and we have a clearly defined path for that, and no more than 2 people in the restroom at a time. And, there is some concern around, whether people respect it, but we really haven't had any issues. I think people are really grateful to get out, who are out, and I think they're being, really respectful of understanding the concerns that we all still have as we try to open. And so for us and for most of the breweries I've talked to, it hasn't been a big challenge. I think some of the areas that are tougher, as a lot of breweries, ours included, have been very kid friendly in the past. And just trying to figure out how do you manage that dynamic, because it's, the kids love to just go run around and play, and trying to help families realize, like, hey, they have to stay at the table with you. They can't just go run wherever they want to. So, from that perspective, we also haven't seen a lot of families trying to bring kids as much, so I think the consumer dynamic looks a little bit different in terms of who's showing up. But we have had, because people can't go to a bar, our inside isn't even open. Really haven't had too much trouble, and have found that customers have been really respectful of the rules. I just think it's really important that breweries explain those rules clearly when the customer shows up.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Eric, same question for you. And I know, I'm sure a lot of it's going to be the same, just the nature of a brewery tap room, but I know laws vary from state to state and how each state is handling things. But what does reopening look like for you there at Weldwerks?
Yeah, we took kind of the same course where the state, Colorado, allowed towards the very end of May. It started out as more restaurant reopening, but the Brewers Guild here worked really well with the state as well to advocate for ways for breweries to open. If you kind of took more on a restaurant model where you had a food option, if it's your own kitchen versus or pairing up with a restaurant nearby or something of that sort, and so we had that option. I think, like Chris mentioned with. Same in probably many areas where we could open, but we decided to also, wait and see kind of what happens, and then really start envisioning what that taproom experience would be like. And then the state, I think this past week or last week or so, is allowing bars to open with a different capacity limit, and so they kind of took away this mandatory food option that you had to have if you wanted to open, and kind of eased up a little bit that we could work through those kind of legal and the executive orders being issued, and then from there, very similar of utilizing outdoor space. The nice part, I think, weather-wise, we get the storms that might go through, but generally just kind of a nice Colorado dry summer air, so you can utilize that outdoor space, and we are in a position of just having able to expand out into our parking lot area and use that space a lot, and that's where we are beginning, is just outdoor seating. We are kind of trying this hybrid model right now of coming in to place an order, but it's not at the bar. It's tables that are stationed away from the bar, so that the person who's serving the beer or pouring it actually is not interacting with the customers, that they're kind of in their own space where they're not interacting with customers, to just keep them kind of safe from any possibilities of coming in contact with someone. And then from there, we take the beer out to a table, so we have our tables numbered, and so kind of like that, a little model. And but that's the only reason coming in, or to use the restrooms at this point. And we're working towards just possibilities of things like being able to order from your table. If you can, pull up your phone and order, using things like digital menus, so that we don't have to keep kind of our eyes on how much paper we're using, and just keeping the paper usage down, just more environmentally friendly. And having people more access menus on their phone and making it a little bit easier that way as well. So we hope to keep experimenting with those so that we can kind of hit different comfort levels. That we realize that there's some, as people are starting to come back out, there's some of our customers coming in, and they know exactly what they want. They're just happy. They're like, the places are opening up. They can come get that beer that they've been wanting to have on draft for so long. And so maybe something like a pull up a site on your phone and order from your table works perfectly. But then what about, someone who wants to more talk about the beer, and, they have the questions, and they can and talk with our staff. And that's where we have an order section that we've established that has different social distancing markers, lots of hand sanitizer throughout, but a big enough space too that there's really not this worry of a line congregating and people feeling like they're compacted into a small space. It's very open, being able to use our tap room to do that, and not have any seating. And down the road, we're going to have to revisit. Eventually the weather's going to get cold, things like that. And what does indoor seating eventually look like? We'll eventually have to tackle that as well. But definitely safety in mind, and using the outdoor space so that we can keep things spaced out. And we're also working with a reservation system so that we get a lot of different customers from all over the state. A lot of folks come from Denver picking up their cans, and just keeping that in mind too is, by offering reservations, then that you're going to be able to come and have a table, instead of just taking that risk of showing up and then a line forming, or just making it kind of a disappointing trip that you can't get in because we're say every table's full. So we're also learning how to handle reservations, and working through a system like that as well. And it's been fun kind of opportunity to see different kind of models. I think there's been some anxiety for staff at times because it's a new model, but we're working through it slowly to get used to it, and then we make changes as we can, and as we get feedback.
So maybe a follow-up question to that, and I guess Chris, with maybe from your involvement with the Georgia Craft Brewers Guild, and maybe Justin with your involvement with the Colorado Guild, I'd ask, and it sounds like both breweries, Creature Comforts and Weldwerks, are doing a tremendous job putting customer and employee safety first and foremost. Has the potential threat or looming legal liability from a spread of the virus, either with your employees or with customers, seems that there's been the legislative responses to that have been slow in coming, either at the national or the state level. I think we just got some legislation kicking around in the Georgia legislature. But has that impacted your decisions at all in terms of the reopening and kind of how you're going about things?
I guess, we wouldn't open if we were concerned that we couldn't do it safely. So far greater my concern is everyone's safety than legal liability. And so, I think, right, the counter to a legal liability is that you did things in a very safe manner, and you had the precautions and the policies, and they were followed, and that's kind of always the case, right? I mean, we're always at risk of legal liability in our environments, because of the nature of what we sell. And either you're doing the right thing to protect the public and to create a safe environment, or you're not. And so I'll just quite frankly, I haven't followed too much of what's going on in terms of what protections might be offered or not, because I guess from our standpoint is we're just mostly concerned with ensuring that it's safe, and I think if we put the right safety precautions in and we ensure that the policies are being followed, then that's going to be a fairly defensible thing, and someone would have to, I guess, in that case, what proved that we were indeed the area that they contracted at. Certainly, I think that if you do everything that you should do for the safety of your employees, that should cover the legal liability, and the customer, that kind of covers the legal liability side. So I guess that's that's for me is like the legal liability is kind of like, if legal liability is only there if you're not doing things that you should be doing, you know. That's the only risk in my opinion.
Yeah, this is Justin. I'd echo those sentiments too. I know the Colorado Guild here, the president worked hand in hand with Governor Polis when the reopening was coming down towards the end of May, and came up with all the safety precautions, all the guidelines. Obviously in Colorado here we do have a mask ordinance currently that requires masks in any public settings. So that was a definite starter when we got back to reopening. So I'd echo Chris's sentiments. I think as long as you're following the guidelines, I don't think that your legal liability is too large. With that said, I haven't heard too much in the legislation about giving businesses immunity from that at this point. And I know from a federal level, I've heard wrinklings of that, but nothing seems to be gaining too much steam. I actually did have a follow-up question from a comment that Eric made, and I kind of wanted to hear Chris's thoughts on this. And I was pretty impressed, at least here in Colorado, and probably across the country too. I'm sure a lot of the states did the same thing with how quickly all the breweries out here pivoted to these online ordering models and getting their apps set up and getting their website set up for this online ordering. And as Chris said, they got their drive-through model, I think, turned around in a couple of days. But I was wondering with the reopening, and Eric had mentioned the digital menus, and I know I've seen some companies at some of the beer festivals that have, you can put QR codes on your tables, and pulls up your menu and you order sugar. Is that going to be something that you think we're going to see more of in the industry, just given this kind of less contact service than we're used to having in the brewery setting?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I mean, this has certainly moved a lot of the digital nature of business forward, right? Whether it's just how you do meetings these days, to what interactions look like. We don't have something yet. We've definitely talked a lot about the idea of an app and some ways for people to be able to order directly from their table and even pay, through their phone, so that we just remove another level of touch point. So, I think, one of the things that Eric said earlier, which I think is kind of gets lost in the whole conversation, is just this whole idea of what the tap room experience is like. And, at the end of the day, I kind of keep saying, like, if the experience should almost, we should come out of this better than we went into it. We would have never stopped our tap room and gone to a table service model if not for COVID-19. And yet when we think about our purpose, which is to foster opportunities for human connection, a table service model is far better than a bar service model in terms of our ability to connect with people, and also for people to connect with each other, because they no longer have to get up and go stand in a line for 10 minutes away from their group of people. And I think things like, providing digital content that they can read through, menus on their phone that they can sit and take time to engage with, where they can dig, maybe watch a video, learn more about the beers, create conversation starters, are all the types of things that, we kind of would have just never stopped things because they were going well. And quite frankly, consumers probably would have yelled at us if we tried to switch overnight. And now they would yell at us if we tried to open up the old way. And so it's kind of forced us to rethink things. But I really think that there's, at least for us, I believe we're going to create a better experience for the customers than we did before. And for some people, they may want more of a bar experience, but that's really not what we're about. We really want to sit and engage with customers, talk with them about the different beers that we make and the history of them, and why we chose to make them the way we do, and where the ingredients are from, and who that local farmer is. So I think those are all kinds of things that are really being allowed. And I think, to just kind of tie back in, like that ability to tell story through some digital content while people are at your establishment, I think is going to be a big thing in the future. And I don't see it ever reverting back. I think this is kind of going to be a tipping point for that sort of digital service model. And my guess is, people will never really go back the other way.
Some big changes coming for sure. Absolutely. You are listening to the Hops and Ledgers podcast, brought to you by Whitflea LLP. Whitfley ranks among the top 20 accounting consulting firms in the nation for nearly 90 years. They have educated, advised, and assisted clients in the successful navigation of complex and ever-changing business environments. Today, the firm works with more than 150 craft breweries across the country and also provides services to a wide range of adjacent industries, including manufacturing and distribution, construction, real estate, and agribusiness. Whether you are a startup brewery or looking to expand your operations, Whitfley can help you turn your dream into a successful reality. Learn more and find your local office. Visit whitfley.com. That's WIPFLI.com. Now, Chris, to kind of follow up on what you were just saying there about this, is there any concern, and I know you've addressed many times that you are looking to keep that personal touch there. So as we go to these digital ordering or, multimedia to view info about your beer, is this going to force kind of humanity in general to lose a little bit of our personal touch?
Well, I think, that's the delicate balance, right? I think there's one of the, we have to figure out how to do human connection in a digital age, and I think that is, we can either suggest that it's an either or, that we have to do one or the other, in which case the oncoming of digital is scary and we fight it, or we say somebody's going to figure out how to do this. Let's be the ones that figure it out. And we're definitely on the latter part of that, to just say, look, this world is coming. This is what it's going to look like. We still believe human interaction is extremely important. So how do we do that in a better way? And do I have the answer? Absolutely not. But we are definitely committed to ensuring that the human aspect of craft beer remains. I think there are incredible stories. There are incredible people involved in this industry. And we want to make sure that doesn't get lost. Because there's a risk, right? If you go too far the other way, you just end up like macro beer. It's just an advertisement without a story. It's a brand without a person. And what has gotten craft where it's at is being the sort of antithesis of that, being real people with real stories and beers that talk about something meaningful or are made from local ingredients. And so we can't afford to lose that as an industry. And so I think, my caveat to, yes, we're going to try to move into more digital, is I think we all have to figure out how to do that responsibly, because if everything goes digital, like, quite frankly, craft loses. When Drizzly, the bigger they get, right, or Amazon someday gets into beer, then it becomes, well, how do you get found on Amazon? Well, you get found by buying advertising. And that's not going to help craft beer. We benefit from the hand selling versus the digital, and from a grand scheme of things. Even the retailers being able to drive beer to people's homes is not necessarily great for craft potentially, because we live on new brands and diversity of portfolios and exciting new things. And if customers don't know it exists, if they don't get the time to shop in the store anymore, if they have to scroll through 50 pictures before they get to the craft section because AB paid the advertising to get the top billing on the website, craft has some potential, big roadblocks ahead. So, we need to accept that it's coming and figure out how to play in that space. But I would caution us about, pushing the agenda forward too quickly, because I do think there's some inherent risks with it as well for craft as an industry.
And Eric, somewhat on that note, talking about just the unforeseen things like losing our personal touch there, is there anything that you can think of that breweries may miss as they look to reopen? Anything that's an easy pitfall to fall into?
I think one challenge is that communication that with the customer. I think sometimes just really making sure that we are communicating well, and setting that expectation, but also doing it in a way that doesn't turn off the customer. It's a delicate balance there as well, just kind of seeing different messaging put out as breweries start opening their tap rooms, and wanting to create a safe environment, but also making sure that message is, we want to welcome everyone that that we can at a time safely, and what precautions are being taken and what expectations are being taken, and considering that, I mean, for us, we we ask that everyone wears masks when they're moving around, and we've seen other businesses in the Greeley area kind of struggling with having a mask type of mandate, and some kind of just giving up, where they're like, yeah, people just are choosing not to, they chose to go somewhere else that wasn't being as strict on their mask rules, so they're kind of just dropping a mandate. And for us, we looked at it, and it's this balance of, we want to keep our staff and our all of the customers that are there at a time safe. And so it was a discussion of, well, let's have some extra masks on hand, some just disposable surgical masks that, we can say, oh, you forgot a mask, here you go, and not turn it into this turn away and say, well, you are not welcome here. And I think that's that kind of hospitality view, and it's definitely challenging, because it's this different kind of feel for people to kind of come in and have a little bit more regulations when everyone just has that, I want to get it back to normal feel. And we're trying to train on what normal looks like and get used to that. And so just finding the ways to keep the hospitality in mind, but also having those standards, and sticking to them, because to me, that's looking forward, is in these weeks of opening up, it's fresh on everyone's mind that you need to put that mask on, or not go socialize with another table, like, maybe just wave at them from across the little the tent we set up, but you can't go sit with them, you need to stay with your group. And what will it be like, a month or 2 months down the road, and just how kind of relaxed everyone started seeming to get. And now, as we're seeing cases on a rise, maybe that's going to change a little bit, but there was just that relaxed feeling. And so that's for me in the forefront of my mind. And talking with our taproom manager and our taproom staff is like, the first few days, even though there might be some just kind of uneasy feelings of like, how do I, approach certain situations, and de-escalate maybe situations where someone's a little upset about a certain policy. We'll work through those, but then down the road, that's where it's also challenging, because as far as we all see, COVID is with us for the long haul. That we're going to be with these regulations and whatnot for a while. And to me, that's just one thing to also keep in mind is, how do we keep safety on the forefront, not only for staff, but for the customers as well. And sadly, don't have like the perfect answer to that, besides just maybe constant refreshers and reminders. But that's one thing I think to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think it's going to be something that as we're looking at this customer experience, there are going to be customers and that comply. And again, we've got to do the right thing for the customers, so that they're, our other customers are safe, our employees are safe, and we create a safe environment. So I did want to go back, and we've been talking a good bit about the customer experience and how it's augmenting and changing. And I would say one thing, through social media channels, historically, the craft brewers have done a tremendous job of establishing, whether it's through new release announcements, special events at the tap room, musical events, farmers markets, just different things that are going on, have done a real nice job, I think, of connecting on a virtual kind of one-on-one basis with a lot of their customers that have signed up for whatever social media feeds those are. And Chris, I think you mentioned it, that we're not trying to be try and get ourselves, we probably won't fare very well trying to be in a big digital marketplace like an Amazon. So, I mean, can you talk a little bit about, social media and kind of how you see that changing, as whether that's online sales portals? I guess, Eric, you mentioned a little bit about, making reservations and, virtual ordering and a number of other things. How do you see social media continuing to impact this?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll social media and then talk broadly for digital as well. I mean, I think for most of us who are craft brewers, and really any business these days, right, but certainly for small business in general, beyond just craft beer, social media is our main platform for conversation with consumers. It is our main marketing channel because it doesn't cost anything. I mean, it does if you buy ads, I guess, but broadly speaking, it's a extremely effective way to communicate direct to consumers who have, who have opted in for your communications. And so, I think we're all already kind of moving heavily down that path. And I actually think that, the small breweries or craft is on that platform is better set up than the big folks because we have stories to tell. And that, I think, again, it's how we leverage that social media. I think taking it, and in the past, we have used it very much to announce beer releases, and it's been sort of very product focused. I think there's going to need to be some change in that to be a little bit more storytelling of who we are and what we're about, particularly if we don't get as many opportunities to do it one-on-one in person. And then I think broadly from a digital standpoint, we've had a lot of success with things that there's no reason we didn't do them before, but now we've started doing them, which is, like a virtual beer dinner where, we're doing with an account in Atlanta that has a meal that people come and pick up with a beer from Creature Comforts. They take it home to eat it at their house, and everybody logs on at 7:00, and we're there, and there's 30 people on a Zoom call. And, that again to me is the type of stuff that, look, the ABs, the Miller Coors, they can't do that. They don't have anyone to get on a call that, quite frankly, is going to be interesting to a group of people to talk about the history of our brewery or our beer. And I'm sure that that's an over-exaggeration. But I worked in that with those groups of breweries for, I guess, 12 years. And, they don't just have that authentic storyteller the same way. And so I think that's the kind of example of how we can leverage digital to still create human connection, right? Like we can create a connection with a consumer in a small environment that is actually like just not an effective way, nor will AB and them try to play in that, because reaching consumers 25 at a time over a 1.5 hour dinner is not what they're going to do. That's not. And so I think that's the kind of stuff where we all have to start thinking about how we leverage social media and digital to tell our story and to connect with consumers, because we're not going to have quite as many opportunities to do it in person. And if we just try to use our social media as brand building, like, informational, then we're going to just totally lose our ability to connect with consumers. So, we've been really trying to figure out how do we leverage those opportunities, whether it's even just an Instagram conversation with, Eric and us getting together to talk. We've got one coming up with Monday Night Brewing to just, and these are things that we could have done forever ago, but we didn't. And consumers are interested in hearing what we have to say. And, and obviously things like this, right? Like Beer Guys Radio, being more engaged in this content and realizing this is like, always has been, but is even more such an effective way to communicate to consumers in a more direct way when we can't be face to face anymore.
That's we've definitely seen a lot of breweries, capitalizing on that with whether it's a remote Zoom session that they let everybody join in. They've invited people in, maybe some things that people, don't get a chance to see at all normally. They'll have a Zoom call from the brew deck and they'll get to actually, watch them there brewing. I've even seen some that have continued with their trivia nights and such, inviting those, just doing those online and trying to stay engaged there. So it's been much appreciated, considering we've all been locked in our houses for months, to have at least those options are there, to do stuff like that.
For Creature, one of the values is make it better. Another one's, crave curiosity. So it's like, we need to be curious about this new world and we need to figure out how to make it better, and I think craft is just out of all industries, craft is an incredibly crafty group, or, sort of snazzy group of entrepreneurs, that just work really hard. We've had to overcome so many things. I mean, just in Georgia, and this, Tim, the different
Sure.
changes in laws, the taproom, this is like model 3,724 of taproom operations that we've had to do in the 6 years since we've been open. So
Right.
I think we're a pretty tough group of people who are very entrepreneurial in spirit and will figure out a way. And I'm excited to see where craft comes out of this.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. A lot of things learned, and hopefully we can take what we've learned through this awful situation, and like you said, Chris, apply it to the future and kind of get the best of both worlds out of that for sure. Well, Justin, a question for you, kind of shifting gears a little bit, looking at the financial side of things. When we did episode one, we talked about the relief that was out there, through different credits and loans and grants and such. So as this has went on longer, I know none of us thought we'd be in this 3+ months later. But is there anything new out there? Are there any new resources for breweries that are struggling? We have seen some businesses have shut down and have said the coronavirus pandemic is the reason for that. Is there any other relief out there available?
Yeah, right now the PPP loan and the EIDL loans are set to expire at the end of this month. So those avenues are going to be shut off currently as it stands. They're still I think close to $100 billion left in the PPP funds. So they may extend those with the next round of legislation, which is apparently in the works. I don't know how far along any of those have gotten at this point. I know there's a lot of infighting about all the small little nuances of all the bills. Usually the big stuff is pretty across both aisles that needs to get done. So, but from a local standpoint, I actually just got an email literally a few minutes ago from our state and local team out here in Colorado has actually just passed a small business recovery loan program. So at the local level, I think you're going to see some relief efforts come across until we can potentially get another relief package from a federal standpoint. But right now, if you haven't gotten a PPP loan or an EIDL loan put in, they're still available. There's still plenty of money. So I would say, but they're also set to expire pretty soon. So that's something that needs to get done pretty quickly. But until then, it's looking at the local levels, lots of grants out there for small businesses. The SBA, even outside of the PPP and EIDL, is still a great avenue for small businesses if they need a little bit of runway currently. And really, just I think this is a great time. And at least I know with my clients that I've seen personally, this is a great time to really reevaluate your business model and your business in general and streamline it and make it more efficient. I think the online ordering systems, these, the packaging, all that stuff, it's a way to really, it's really a good time to take a step back because you're not as busy with the day to day with having the tap room open all the time. I think a lot of my clients kind of lost sight of the overall business, just trying to get what was 5 inches in front of them done instead of looking 5 days in front of them. So I think it's a really great time for businesses to really sit down and reassess how they operate and ways that they can operate more efficiently and effectively to make their businesses smoother and more profitable, to be honest.
A lot to think of, a lot to look at here, gentlemen. I think we've addressed most of what we had on the table here. Pat, Chris, Eric, anything additional that we need to cover here about this reopening?
I think it's been a tremendous forum here, and I mean we've covered a lot of space. Maybe one last flash round here, Chris or Eric. Any major changes to your business model? Chris, I think you mentioned tap room 3,700 version 3,700 something. Major changes that you guys are already contemplating going forward, changes in your, whether it's distribution model, your obviously we've talked a lot about the tap rooms here, but any significant changes that you foresee that you can share currently?
We've always kind of had a bit of a multi-pronged approach in terms of distribution and tap room, and the desire to expand on both of those. So I don't think that there's been a huge change in that. I will say that probably pre-COVID, we were much more bullish on like we should open more tap rooms. And now, I think that has been tempered a little bit, to say, well, should we do that or should we invest the money behind, some marketing and new markets to grow the brands? So I don't know that we're going to change direction. The strategy will be the same, but which steps we take in what order, I could see there being some, some significant differences in that. And we've had to relook at the taproom model for sure. What we would have built perhaps in the past is something that we would now go look at and say, okay, what happens if this just continues to come or the next COVID comes? Can we build that model sustainably? Well, so yeah, I think there's been some significant, let's stop and think about this.
Hey, Eric, that actually leads into a good question. I know Weldwerks was in the process of opening a second location in south of Denver.
Yeah.
Has this pandemic tempered that? And I know construction out here in this state is always slow, but even when the construction gets moving, has that really tempered your guys' thoughts on even opening that as a sit down location currently?
Yeah, we hit right when our building permits COVID hit. We're kind of in that process of being approved, so we definitely had some more timeline setbacks on that. As things are opening up, that process is moving forward, and we're hoping we'll have some movement on being able to start building. And I think once we see what the possible timeline is, if it's something where we're more in the winter months, it might be waiting, delaying until weather is nicer, or starting a soft opening that kind of lasts longer. But we are still planning to open up our second location in the Springs, in Colorado Springs here, and moving forward with that. And so far, we're just kind of in that midst of all the things, that the red tape that is done before we can start constructing. But everything is lined up so that we can hit the ground running once we get permits and all of that piece. And I think for us, it's still looking at that market, and seeing where we can have an impact there, and that we still believe that we can, and that we know we have a lot of fans of Weldwerks in the Colorado Springs area, and still want to have that experience down there for them. So timing wise might be the only thing, is we see what happens come this fall. If things get worse and maybe it's not the best, because it is a smaller location and it won't have as ease of doing an outdoor seating area like we can up in the Greeley location. And so we might be waiting and seeing, once construction is done. But yeah, we're excited, and I think our staff is very excited, as they've heard about it for a while, and just this kind of delayed it longer. So we're hoping we'll hear some good news in the coming weeks.
Eric, that made me think of another question here. We saw kind of our beer festival season just get totally destroyed this year. And this definitely looks like something that's going to impact that in the future. And we know that you have your big invitational beer festival there. What is the future of the beer festival going to look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we made the decision to cancel the invitational this year. And the ideas and the decision on that was really looking at, first delayed it from June to October. And the festival itself has been held indoors. And thinking, like, if we're in the midst of people wearing masks and social distancing, and all of those things that do need to happen, but how does that affect the actual festival? And for us, it was like it really diminishes and takes away from the experience we really wanted to create and have created in the past. For the future of festivals, I think it's going to be challenging. I do foresee maybe not this summer. I mean, there's a few maybe in Colorado that have been moving forward with their plans, just different festival organizers that have planned for outdoor festivals. For us, we just kind of decided we'll pull back and wait and see before we know what happens with our festival in the coming future. But maybe outdoors is where things do start, but seeing, limited capacities, probably more disposable cups, things like that. But it really have to gauge the comfort for people to be able to go out, and really you're mingling, and how do you keep things safe with people moving around? That will be challenging. And I know there's been some, virtual festivals, and maybe that's still in that kind of creative process that, will there'll be some that are gonna take a try at it and learn from it and develop those more. So maybe we will see more digital type of virtual festivals. However, that model might look like. I think we're still in the beginning phases of that to see, will people attend that? What does that even, that to me, that's hard for my head to wrap around, especially thinking of like GABF and how everything. And I know they're starting to get their plans working on and how that looks, because the whole idea is to go experience and try things. And how do you create that when someone isn't going to be able to go and actually try it, where they might be going to a local brewery they always go to, or going to a liquor store and picking up some craft beer brands that they could always get? How do they get something that they don't ever get to try? And that, to me, it seems like the challenge. And yeah, I think maybe next season, especially summertime, maybe there'll be a little bit more clarity of what that looks like, and maybe we'll be in a different situation where festivals can start making a comeback.
Yeah, to add to that, Eric, I did recently read that Wyoming is still going to hold their annual beer festival a little bit north of us. So I'm interested to see. I'm not sure I'm quite ready to go, but I'm interested to see how they handle that, and how they handle the crowds and the mingling and the distancing that needs to be done. Because while Wyoming is one of the states that's had a very low COVID rate and size, there you don't just get the people from Wyoming, you're getting people from out of town, from Colorado, that travel to go to those type of festivals. So you're, much like, spring breakers, going to Florida and then going back to their respective states. I think that's what, a lot of these larger beer festivals entail. There's a lot of people that travel to these. So, and that's where the risk, I think, or a big part of the risk is in spreading, this virus more is going to an event like that and then flying back to another state, or even flying from another state and bringing it to a state like Wyoming.
Exactly. Yeah. I grew up in Wyoming, actually, so I can understand maybe the attempts and see what happens. And I'd be very interested to see how they handle it. And still probably also agree with you, Justin. I'll probably not be in attendance, but maybe you can reach out to breweries, or if anyone that I know from Wyoming, maybe if they go. So one of our sales manager actually lives in Cheyenne and commutes down, and it's about an hour from Greeley. So he might have some insight on that as well.
Be interesting to see what goes on out there. We'll have to keep an eye on to the states that do this and see how it works out for them, especially those that are, Texas is seeing a big spike with the way they've reopened, but a state like Wyoming, kind of see how things go. Because I like the social aspect of beer. I miss it. I want it back. So hopefully we can get it.
I think we all do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah. Chris and Eric, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise. We greatly appreciate it. Justin and Pat, thank you for joining, sharing your knowledge, and helping direct this conversation. Thanks to Whipflea for sponsoring these discussions. Pat, if people have additional questions or want to learn more, where can they go to do that?
Great. Yeah, Tim, appreciate that. And I'd also like to add my thanks to Chris and Eric, representing Creature Comforts and Weldwerks, respectively, for being part of this informative discussion. Thanks, Justin, for your insight. And Tim, thank you for helping pull all this together. If you've got questions about SBA loan programs, PPP loan forgiveness applications, new legislative developments, anything that's happening right now for your beer business or in response to the pandemic, check out our website at www.whipflea.com. That's www.wipfli.com. And at that landing page, there is a COVID-19 resource center you might find very helpful. So thanks again, Tim.
Absolutely. Thank you, Pat. You've been listening to Hops and Ledgers Episode 2, where we've discussed reopening your brewery amid the coronavirus pandemic. Thank you for tuning in, and be sure to look for additional episodes in the future. Cheers.